So I'm just going to disappear at that time. If it's still going on, I just wanted you to know. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dottie. All right. Well, without further ado, I'll just give a brief word of introduction to my friend Steve Mullaney. We are very thankful to have him joining us. Steve is someone I got to know pretty quickly when I moved to Minneapolis. In fact, at my first meeting at the Episcopal Church offices in Minneapolis, I met Steve, and it's a little bit funny. I'd had a meeting with the bishop and with one of his staff to talk about my interests as far as ministry. And I said, well, you know, I don't come from like a churched background. I didn't grow up in the church. And so I'm really interested in people of similar backgrounds, you know, people who are agnostic or maybe atheists. And this other person said, oh, right, the so-called nuns, you know. And so then she introduced me to Steve, and she said, Steve, you and Ryan will really get along because he's really into nuns. N-U-N-S is what Steve thought. And so you should have seen his face when he heard that I was really into nuns. Steve is into the other set of nuns, and additionally into doing ministry with young folks, with people from all sorts of religious and racial backgrounds. And he's done a really amazing job with the university age students in the Twin Cities with the Episcopal Church. And he's also got lots to tell us of his recent experience in the Twin Cities. So Steve, maybe you could start off with telling us a little bit about your work in the Episcopal Church, and then we'll go from there into your experiences in the weeks since George Floyd's death and all the recent events.
Absolutely. And wondering, would you like to open us in prayer? Would you like me to open us in prayer? Or?
Well, I was thinking, Steve, I'm happy to open us with prayer, or close us with prayer. How about you open us with prayer and I'll close us? Does that work?
That's what I was about to say.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
All right, dear God, who knits us into communities at local levels and national levels and global levels. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to sit with each other over Zoom and help us to really listen to what you're putting on our hearts in this space and this time. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, well, thanks for that kind welcome. And I had the opportunity to co-pilot a van with Ryan from Minneapolis to Cincinnati in one day with a van full of college students, so that we could learn about the intentional community space that we have down there as we launched our own. So very, very sad to have lost Ryan from his brief time in Minnesota, and y'all should know how blessed you are to have him with you in your midst. So what do we do as the University Episcopal Community? So I think one of the things that's the most on my heart is the sense of beloved community, and how beloved community can interrupt social isolation. So there's a lot of research that says that right now the loneliest generation are people in their 20s. There's a recent poll that found that 22%, or about 1 out of 5, people in their 20s, when asked, how many friends do you have, say 0. Now that's not 0 close friends or 0 best friends, it's just straight up 0. And I don't care what you believe, what your faith is. I think that God's vision for us is life together, and not life in isolation and in community. So at the root of my ministry is really trying to look at how can we equip the young adults in our midst to know that they are beloved, and to get the skills that are necessary to be able to build community, whether it's in their dorms, in their classrooms, in their neighborhoods, in the different affinity groups. So we do that through all different ways. There's an intentional community house that I alluded to, that this fall is going to have 7 folks living in it. There's meals that we host. We equip people to be small group leaders, and we do worship and dinner as well. Our I guess mission statement, if you will, is blessing Minneapolis with stories and meals to respond to the crisis of social isolation with beloved community. And those stories and meals, we love to start them off with the Holy Scripture stories and the meal that we share around the Eucharistic table, and then transition that to the holy stories of our own lives and the meals that we share around the dinner table. And we think that when all of those things come together, we hit that sweet spot between where is God transforming us in our own lives and hearts, and where is God transforming the world that we're living in. So yeah, I think that's a bit about me and a bit about our community.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Can you speak a little bit too about how your ministry has shifted in focus with the university students? I was around for a little bit of that transition where you were realizing, there was one set of students that you had been seeking, and then you found another group with Eric and with Marcos and some of the other folks.
Yeah. So when I showed up, I've been at this for a little over 8 years. And when I showed up, there were 2 students that were involved in the student ministry, and they were both like, we're graduating, goodbye. And so what I started doing, instead of building programs and hoping that folks would randomly show up, was starting to have conversations with folks and seeing where those conversations led. And that initial round of conversations started with folks who were, came out of an Episcopal background. And the number of 18-year-olds who grew up within the Episcopal Church and are seeking an Episcopal Church experience and happen to live in Minneapolis. It's not a large number. We don't need 2 hands or even 1 hand to identify that number, right? Per year. But, I think we are still called to show up and share our tradition and do things. So what these conversations led to was some deeper relationships with folks. And I'm pretty good at showing up random places and just having conversations with people. And so one thing would lead to another, and started meeting folks who were maybe first-generation college students who might have started at a community college and didn't necessarily know why they were there or what they wanted to transfer to or what they wanted to do. Meeting folks who were, immigrants or the children of immigrants, some who might have had, documentation questions and concerns, and just sort of was like, well, how can I be a resource for folks? I mean, I'm pretty good at being able to send emails and show up to meetings and make plans. Maybe I could just sort of do that. And then, just sort of one thing led to another. And I mean, we've got now a mix of folks that are in 4-year school, 2-year school, nothing. Black folks, white folks, Latino folks, Asian folks, folks that are really excited about the church, and folks that were like, wait, what? That was a church service? I had no clue. So, I think for us, it's just sort of been about how do we follow those relationships. I had a friend who's a hospital chaplain say, the role of the chaplain is show up, build the fire, tend the fire, tell the story, and then leave. And that's kind of how I think we operate.
Great. Yeah, I had the chance on that bus trip to get to know some of the students that Steve has been working with, and it was really a remarkable experience of ministry for me to move out of the sort of the Episcopal Church, Book of Common Prayer, youth ministry comfort zone. Like it was a stretch area for me, but one that has drastically informed how I look at ministry, especially with young people.
Yeah.
I think now, Steve, let's jump into what your experience has been in Minneapolis since the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police, and the uprisings that resulted from that, and are to a certain extent ongoing, and the other transformations that are happening.
Yeah. So I live in North Minneapolis, and in a neighborhood that is pretty mixed between Black folks, white folks, and Asian folks. And George Floyd was killed in South Minneapolis. And both the city is sort of divided into north, south, southwest, and northeast. I don't know how we chose those four names, but in both north and south quadrants of the city, that's where we started to see a lot of protest and a lot of the things that made the news. It was a pretty surreal couple of weeks right after that happened. I remember getting, about a week after, I got an email. Everyone got an email from the city that said, please check your bushes to make sure that there aren't explosives that have been hidden there, or accelerants, because there were folks that were hiding, things in grass and in shrubs and waiting for night to come back and get it. So I was in my particular part of the neighborhood. We didn't see a lot of there were no fires, but over 500 buildings were damaged or destroyed. And they say it's the second most costly riot in U.S. history, over $550 million worth of damage. So I think one of the things that when everything gets reduced to a soundbite for the news, there's a lot of nuance that happened. As I experienced it, the initial protests were very peaceful. On the first night, there was a very, very peaceful gathering, and then there was a march from the location at 38th in Chicago to the site of the 3rd Precinct police station. And then here's where all the disinformation and misinformation, and it's unclear what happened, starts popping up. Like there was, a night when it's unclear if police provoked the crowd, if the crowd provoked police. There was a video of just like someone that had infiltrated the protest who was wearing all black and had a black umbrella for no reason. And this was like the first person to break windows and start fires. And it's just like really, really confusing as to what happened. But in the arrests that have been made recently, a lot of the folks, I couldn't give you numbers, but at least a half dozen of the folks who've been arrested for arson have been folks, who are not from Minneapolis, like people who drove here, flew here to cause problems and to infiltrate. So, it's just like there was a lot that was going on, like all at the same time, and hard to know who to trust, what was real, what was safe, and So I think during those times, what I was doing was trying to be present to like what was the conversation that was happening social media, because the protests didn't just happen. They weren't spontaneous. They were the result of a lot of organizing and a lot of collective effort from neighbors for many, many, many years. There's always been, Minneapolis is the home of the American Indian movement, which is a Native and Indigenous people's movement that started, I believe, in the late 60s, early 70s to try to prevent or end police brutality against the Native community. We have one of the largest urban Native populations in the U.S. There's an organization called Communities United Against Police Brutality that's done a lot of great work for many, many years. And in 2016 and 2017, Minneapolis police killed a man named Jamar Clark, and the St. Paul St. Anthony police killed a man named Philando Castile. And as a result of uprisings there and people organizing, like there was sort of already an infrastructure in place of folks who were had been through this before and came forward with more and sharper demands for what change could look like. So I think because those relationships had already been built, we're able to get to a point where, like, it sounds like the city of Minneapolis is going to vote about whether to fire all our police officers and start from scratch. Like, that might happen in November, which is like, wow, that was fast. So, so I think one of the lessons there is that, like, I mean, we've all seen like that iceberg where it's like there's the tip above the iceberg. What's underneath the iceberg is like years and years of organizing and relationships that were built, primarily led by people of color, by women of color, and if we want to be looking both upstream and downstream to both prevent tragedy best we can in our community, and participate in healing and in transformative work, I think trying to look at, like, what are the relationships that already exist, right? What are the networks that already we can tap into? What are the liturgies? What is the liturgy in the scripture of our neighborhood? Like, in the same way that we have a church calendar, our neighborhoods have their own liturgical calendars. And we might not have, like, they may not put Christmas and Easter on the neighborhood liturgical calendar. It might be the 4th of July parade. It might be the homecoming. It might be the particular festival. Our neighborhoods have, the stories of men and women and folk who have been blessings in our midst that we remember. Like, we remember, the George Floyd and Jamar Clark and Philando Castile, and where, like, they're memorialized in our city. So the more that we can hear the stories that are already being told amongst and through our neighbors, I think that's one of those things that equips us to be able to respond as church. So in the midst of this, I was trying to, like, follow the Twitter, the Twitter chat conversation and the social media conversation from folks who I trusted, who tended to be people who, like, I have a friend of a friend who's like this person who's done this amazing work. What are they doing? What are they saying? What are they asking for? Not trying to show up with my own ideas about, like, this is how this protest should go, or this is what we should be asking for, but to be like, what are the folks who've been on the front lines of this work for years or decades? What are they saying? This is their moment, and how might I, as someone who's outside, how might I support work that's already happening? So yeah, it was confusing. It was scary. It was also, in a lot of ways, there was some hope there. There was some beauty there. Whether it was, like, just, young people showing up to speak their truth and tell their story, whether it was just the importance that folks put on, like, how can we stay safe from COVID during this time? How can we have those protections? And it worked. Protesters who got tested and people who showed up to memorials and vigils who got tested were diagnosed with COVID at a rate that was half that of the general population. So, like, folks were taking care of each other. One of the things that we'll get a chance to talk about, people were, a lot of the folks on the front lines were saying, we need to be getting supplies to our most vulnerable families that, maybe they can't go shop at the store because the store just got burned down. And, neighbors were taking care of neighbors, and calls would go out and say, hey, we need this much, laundry detergent, or this much, rice. And then, like, boom, within however many minutes, it would be like, oh, we don't need this anymore. Please stop bringing us rice. So I think that a lot of people's hearts in my city and worldwide as well, a lot of people's hearts have been moved by the killing of George Floyd and the protests, and are like, I want to be a part of the healing of all of the woundedness. So that I think was beautiful as well. And then what is happening at the memorial site is also, I think, really, really incredible as
well. I have a first question, but then I think maybe some other people might want to jump in and ask you questions at this point too. Can you describe to us what is going on at the memorial site at 38th in Chicago, what that looks like nowadays?
Yeah, so it is, I've been once, and I didn't go for a while. And when I did go, it was to visit one of our students is actually living at the memorial site. Combination of feeling called to go there and experiencing homelessness. And he ended up becoming the caretaker for the bouquets of flowers that people would bring in, and help receive those memorials and arrange it and decorate it and do security. And it's sort of like, I don't know if you've ever been to a fair or a street party where just there's 1,000 things that are all happening at the same time. That's kind of what it's like, only it's also deeply somber and holy space. So I went down to visit, the student and drop some things off with him. And as I walked south on Chicago, about a block and a half away, I passed, a number of signs saying that, this is sacred space and holy space, particularly for Black folks in Minneapolis, and to be mindful of that, and an invitation to everyone who's coming to check your intentions. Why are you here? And then for 2 blocks, it seems like there's this street mural that is just the names of Black and Native people who've been killed by encounters with law enforcement. And George Floyd's name is the closest to the intersection of 38th in Chicago. So just as you're walking closer and closer, you're finding, just more names, and it's just such an experience to just sort of see that and hold all these names all at once. There's art, there's murals, there's flowers. There's someone brought 3 or 4 dump trucks worth of dirt and just planted it. And now there's flowers and vegetables that are just growing on this dirt that's in the middle of the road. There's people that are selling things. There's people that are looking for free supplies. There's people who are there as tourists, and it feels a little gross. There's people who are there to mourn and pay their respects, and everything was happening all at once. And so, like, it, I don't know if I'd say I noticed my transition to the space, but as I like got back into my car and turned it on, I was like, wow, that was heavy. That was powerful. At the intersection of 38th and Chicago, that's where someone created a statue of an upraised fist, and that's what's sitting at the center of the intersection. And there's a ring of flowers that completely surround that. And there's a stage, and people occasionally will take to the stage to say things. As I left, there were 300 people on skateboards that showed up. There was, like, I guess, a skaters rally. And
the rector would like that. He would enjoy that.
Yeah, and the skaters, spoke and said their piece, and then they skated off. So every emotion that you could imagine is present at that memorial, which seems very fitting because, like, every emotion, I think I felt every emotion in the week or two after this.
My first impression of the protests that I went to locally, our small protests, was that this really is a liturgy that's taking place. It is a liturgical act and a sacred space. All right, are there questions from the group? I've got Steve on speaker view, but Will, maybe you can see if there are hands raised.
My question is about the outside agitators.
Yeah.
I've heard that concept before in other towns. It was a peaceful protest, and all of a sudden people came, and we had, these outside agitators who came and did damage, broke windows, whatever happened. I don't discount that. I'm just trying to figure out what the motivation would be for that group. And you can think of all sorts of conspiracy theories that you could weave around that, but what was your impression of why?
Yeah, hard to say. I think that that there's, so my impression would be that these outside groups aren't particularly organized. That it's not like the meeting of people who like to burn down buildings is now in session. But I think one of the joys of the internet is that people who have very niche interests are able to connect with each other and go from thinking I was the only one who thought that I liked films from Spain from the 1980s. That's me. But because of the internet, I can find other people that also like that niche interest, and we're able to connect with each other. Unfortunately, I think that there have been a lot of particularly white supremacist organizations that have been able to find each other and communicate with each other in ways that would not be possible before the time of the internet, and be able to have conversations where folks are anonymous, trying to one-up each other, trying to get a lot of cred or credibility for the things that they say and that they do. And that, like, I don't think that it's that there's like secret armies of people waiting to burn things down, but I think that there's a bunch of yahoos who might be talking with each other, and one person is like, yeah, I'll actually do that. I'll actually drive to Minneapolis and try to burn a thing down. So, like, this is not, I mean, in my experience, like, I don't think that there have been, I mean, I think it's what we've seen in Minneapolis are more white nationalist extremists. I know that around the country there might be some like misguided, so there's that's happening around the country, but also perhaps some like misguided 20-something white Antifa types that are like, I'm just going to show up and burn down a thing. But in general, acting alone in the midst of this, which is why I think that like accountability to each other and to the movement is so very important, that folks with good intentions that want to protest for good intentions, that they should be looking to be accountable to the folks that have been doing the work, as opposed to showing up and trying to burn something down. So like that'd be my impression. If I had to like, so like in my neighborhood, which is, like I said, Black, white, and Asian, but mostly Black, like the buildings that were being targeted were like Black barber shops. So the center of Black economic life and culture, like that's not a thing that folks from our neighborhood are going to want to burn down. Like that just doesn't make any sense. So like who burned down the AutoZone or the pawn shop? I don't know. And then there's probably also an element of folks, you know, being swept up in the emotion, being swept up in all the stuff and making bad choices. But what may not be making the news, like I mentioned that there was a man who was holding an umbrella who burned down an auto parts store. Like as soon as he started throwing bricks through the window, like 10 or 12 people were like, what are you doing? You need to stop this, you know? So I do believe that not just the vast majority, but like the super majority, probably 97, 98% of the folks that are doing the protesting are doing it the right way, you know, through vigils, through marches, through prayers, through art, through other creative expression. And that's this like super niche, radicalized minority of folks that have met each other online, that are doing random stuff. Like there was it was like, you know, people from all different random places that are like, why did someone from Michigan get arrested? Or why did someone from southern Minnesota or the suburbs get arrested? That's strange.
Other questions?
Amy Webb.
So I don't know what I just did, but how do I show anyway, I don't know what I did. Oh, crud. There we go.
I hear you. Oh, there you go. You're back.
Brian, I thought that you had said that, Steve, that you were working with food insecurity issues and how you came together as a community to kind of put a broader array of people together on this. I'm just curious if you'd talk about that and any kind of lessons learned about getting a community energized to do something like that.
Yeah. So the way that I might think about how recovery works, I think about 4 different steps, and in particular, recovery and responding to a disaster that is immediate and visible and just heartbreaking. So we know that in Minneapolis, like in all towns, folks have experienced food insecurity and hunger before these protests. That COVID exacerbated it, and the protests definitely exacerbated it, but that like we weren't living in this like perfectly equal world where everybody had enough. You know, we got Bezos with 150 billion over here, and then we got folks that like when they say give us this day our daily bread, that's not a metaphor. They're like, literally, today I need my bread, and everybody in between, right? So right after the protests happened, I think one of the big reasons why activists were making calls for supplies like rice and shampoo and other things was that folks needed those supplies, particularly families, but there was just no way to be able to buy it because those buildings were either boarded up or burned down. I was at home for a lot of days, but the first day that I drove out, like I had to drive like 25 minutes away in order to go shopping. And that's just what was open. Like a lot of stores closed out of an abundance of caution. A lot of places were boarded up, and the two grocery stores that are nearest to me, they got burned down. So the immediate need was, how do we get folks the things when the things, they are not able to go out and buy the things, particularly in a COVID context. So what was really, really amazing was there were a number of places that just sort of, I don't want to say magically, because it wasn't magic, it was like organizing, right? There were a number of places that became food distribution sites. And everything from churches and schools to just sort of like, hey, there's an abandoned lot on this corner, so come drop off your stuff. And like social media and Twitter specifically was really, really good for communicating that. The call would go out, people would respond. I think when this first happened, the first distribution site, like there was a school that said, we're going to distribute to our students and their families, bring things. And there was so much like there's this photo that's kind of went viral up here of like 2 blocks worth of bags of groceries. And part of me is like, that's really cool and beautiful. And another part of me is like, okay, but who's going to clean that up, right? So it became a little bit more organized. Probably 5 days to a week afterwards, we started to enter like the phase 2 of the recovery, and that stores started to reopen again. And here the problem became that there were still people who needed rice and shampoo that weren't able to get it, but it wasn't because there were no places to sell it, it's because they couldn't afford it. Maybe they lost their income because of COVID, maybe their place of employment was burned down. They're just all the reasons that people are unable to afford basic necessities. So in the days after, I think one of the things that a lot of places were trying to do was to make a plan for how do we make it through this month, or how do we make it through the summer. And so at that point, the need started to be, how can we give these folks that are doing the organizing to support their neighbors enough space so that instead of thinking 24 hours at a time, they're able to think a week at a time, or a month at a time or more. So the church that my parents go to, we just sort of put it out on Facebook. I was at Target, and I was like, well, I'll get, I saw a call for baby supplies. I filled the cart with baby supplies, and I was like, well, should I take a picture and put it on social media or not? I was like, yeah, sure, I will, why not? And I bought $250 worth of supplies, but through Venmo, which is a way to give money to other people through your phone, $600 showed up in my account. Oh, so I went back to, before I went back to make a second run, I asked folks from the school that I dropped off, well, what would be the most useful thing for you? And what they actually said was money, right? Because the way that they wanted to use that money was to supplement what they were receiving with like specialty items, niche items. They got a bunch of baby formula dropped off, but they needed a bunch of sensitive baby formula. So they knew what they needed. They were able to use that money to be able to do that. From my parents' church, they raised just overnight on Facebook, a couple $1,000. And by being in conversation with the school, like about a third of it went to buy contact lens solution, which was a huge need. And then another chunk of it went to buy some other niche baby items, and the rest went to them to be able to decide what to do with. And there becomes a point, sort of in this phase 2, where people from outside trucking supplies in, it starts being not helpful, right? So if I'm a store and I'm selling rice and shampoo, and all of a sudden down the road there's this free rice and shampoo, well, I might need to go out of business. And then down the road, the people that are picking it up, I might get the wrong kind of shampoo or the wrong kind of rice. And I'll be like, oh, whatever. Now, I'm not a person who's had to use shampoo recently, but people with hair tell me that, like, you get a brand and you stick with it. So in that situation, like, it's bad for the local economy because, local folks aren't able to buy and sell. It's bad for the folks who don't have autonomy over what they're able to choose. And it's not super efficient because you're not buying in bulk. And, the school, when we gave them that money, they were able to buy in bulk. So as a result of that, the school that we partnered with, they were able to raise enough money to create what they called the North Star Pantry. The name of the school is KIPP North Star. And for the rest of the summer, they have supplies lined up to be able to drop off to those individual families. And that was another thing that was important to me, to look for a school, because schools have the infrastructure to be able to support folks really effectively. They've already got social workers who have relationships with families. They already have administrators and teachers. They might know who might need help paying a phone bill or an electric bill or a copay on a prescription, or whatever it is. One of the sad things that has been happening is that a portion of the items that have been donated do end up at resale markets. And I don't want to fault people for being in a desperate situation. And, I think it's a small percentage of the supplies, but by being able to show up to a place that already has those trusted relationships, and has, that web of resources, I think it's just a better way to be able to respond. In that phase 3, that's an opportunity as well to be able to approach and say, hey, we really wanted to help you have more space so that you can be thinking, you can be planning. We're a community of people that might want to walk alongside you in this recovery process. What are the things that you might need in addition? So that might be the area for some of that deeper relationship building to start to happen. And then I think finally the fourth step is sort of looking to the future. Like, what are the systems and structures that need to be able to change in order to have a world where folks are able to share in the abundance of God's creation, right? So with the school, they shifted their focus, and they said, now what we're raising money for is our summer tutoring program. And that's, I think through that tutoring program, that's a way to continue to support student learning in a difficult environment. And maybe there'll be some processing of difficult feelings and emotions and other things like that. But that's sort of like that shift to, what is the longer term thing. And it's, there's probably some laws that need to be changed. Probably there's some programs that need to be built. Probably there's some resources that need to be distributed a little differently. But I think that's kind of what I think would be the longer term hope. And through all of this, as you could probably imagine and anticipate, at the beginning, there were a lot of people that were really excited to show up and give and donate and help out. But that is like really fallen off. And that one of the gifts that a faith community might have to offer is the ability to say, hey, we want to make a long-term investment, or we want to make a medium to long-term investment. Like, we know that once the cameras go away and the media goes home, that the rubble's still going to be there, but it's not going to have the same attention as it was before. So being able to say, like, based on our skills and gifts, is there a way that we might want to show up over the long term in partnership? Ideally not in a way that's like, oh, we need to find another 4 volunteers for this thing that we started doing and now we need to do it forever. But instead being like, part of our long-term commitment as a church is like, what's on our hearts is maybe it's food, maybe it's housing, maybe it's racial reconciliation, maybe it's like whatever it is, that that God's vision for us around let's say food is one where we're all able to share the bounty and abundance of God's created world, that we're able to look backwards into our story, into scripture, that God created the world and made it good and made it abundant, that when the Israelites were in the desert and didn't have enough, that God showed compassion and brought manna and brought food to people in their distress, that Jesus through blessing those loaves and fish, created not just that everyone could have enough, but that they had to like get the baskets out to get the extra fish and the extra bread taken care of, that because of this deep scriptural and faith-based heritage that we have, that means something. That means that when we see the world the way it is, that we might want to make it more like the way that God would have it be. And that necessitates maybe some short-term stuff, some medium-term stuff, and some long-term stuff. Not volunteering so that we can check those boxes, but showing up with our time, talent, and treasure so that, the kingdom of this world can more like the kingdom of God.
Could I ask a question?
That was not a brief answer. I'm sorry.
Nancy Cave, go ahead.
So does Minneapolis not have a food bank?
We do, but everything was overwhelmed.
But I mean, so I understand that it might have been overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed, if you are talking about, I know you mentioned many different aspects, but you said, so if that church decides they might be interested in food,
mm-hmm.
There's so many different ways that you could partner with the food bank to get food, with some of the larger grocery stores, not right at the moment, but going into the future. They can give you old bread. They can, and when I say old bread, it's just day old. It's perfectly edible, and any number of things. I'm really surprised. I mean, I think all your ideas are wonderful, but it lacks organization to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, so in the initial response, like, we were living under curfew. We were living
I understand that, but you've moved off of that, right? Are you still under curfew?
No.
So you've moved off of that, and you were talking about, people want to be able to get the shampoo they're used to.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm a little surprised that people, if they're in need, would not be more than grateful to get what you provide for them, So it's always nice to be able to go and buy your own things, but on the other hand, if you don't have it and people are offering it to you,
mm-hmm.
do you usually just turn it down and say, that's not my brand?
Yeah.
I wouldn't think so.
I think one of the dynamics that, particularly around shampoo and hair care products, is that the hair care products that my Black neighbors use and the hair care products that I used when I was growing up and had hair were just like completely different. And there were types of products and offerings that were requested that I hadn't heard of. Either the brand or would even know what to do or what to do with, right? So I think specific to that is if we really want to be in relationship with folks, it's important to help people the ways that they want to be helped, and to show up with products that don't match the culture of the folks that be using them, or would just like be like, oh, I can't use this because this doesn't work with my hair, or my family doesn't eat this. Like I don't know how to cook this. I know how to cook this other thing. So figuring out how does that work in that very, very initial immediate aftermath. I think that was the goal. Like to your point, like, yes, there is a robust network of SNAP and food shelves and other things, but just the amount of stress that everything was put under for that very, very short amount of time, like 2 weeks, but it was a lot of stress all at once.
I can understand that. I just, as you were talking about 4 steps, and you were moving to a second step, and so it just seemed to me, because you know, if you have a food bank in Minneapolis, they have a lot of resources. You know, Dottie knows this really well. We gave out chard at our food pantry, Swiss chard, and nobody knew what to do with it. So we put a recipe with it and said, here's a recipe, here's how you cook it. And, you know, people then felt more comfortable because they had some information, and they even tasted it. They said it tasted really good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many different things that can be done as you move into your other phases.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Like, and fortunately, like, I think it's a good thing that the places that have been distributing food have started to close and shut down, because like to go from phase 1 to phase 2, that's a huge step. And it wasn't like immediate, like the turning on or off of a switch. It was like sort of it was more of a process, and there'd be some parts of the city that were more affected than others. But definitely, I think once we can get things more formally organized, that's probably better for the long-term situation. But there's both like the short-term thing and the long-term thing, and I think that's an opportunity for learning. For learning as well, that the way that, like, if I was in Minneapolis, and I wanted to be useful within the first 48 hours, like the way to do it was to send money through Venmo to strangers who I didn't know that other people have vouched for on the internet, and trust that they will do the right thing with the money. Now, a month later, that's definitely not what I want to do anymore. But, you know, in that very, very particular moment, it was what a lot of folks were doing, and I felt like it was very effective.
All right, I've got Deb Harris next, and then Diane Barnett after that.
Well, Steve, that was sort of following on with what Nancy was leading to, is what's your discernment process for finding what your organization, how you want to proceed with something for which you have passion and talent and ability to support? In
regards to this particular situation in Minneapolis or more generally?
I think I'm asking for your meeting the needs of your community at this time as you go forward, and maybe finding a niche for your organization to continue, because needs aren't going to go away.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think within our community, we have about 100 people that we're checking in with at the campus ministry. So that's everyone from people that we see every single Sunday to people who begrudgingly have coffee with me once a year. So I don't think that the concept of membership is useful. And young people have a much more fluid sense of membership in terms of how they belong to faith communities, how they would describe the words that they would use to describe themselves: Episcopalian, Christian, spiritual, right? And so I don't spend a lot of time or effort into helping folks define themselves as much as I do showing up, listening to their stories, and loving them. So we have, within our groups, we have a number of systems or of leadership structures that we were able to tap into that allowed us to rapidly respond within our membership. So we have peer ministers and we have small group leaders. And so right after COVID started, the first thing that we wanted to do was make sure that everybody had a place to sleep. And like see how everyone was doing mental health wise. And within a week, we were able to have a conversation with every single person that wanted one, and determined that, you know, there were 2 people that we needed to like step in with some emergency funds for, and everybody else was like, was good. As a response to this, we used a similar process to ask, what is on your heart and mind as a result of this, and really wanted to give the space to folks to be able to listen deeply to their friends and peers. And this comes out of like a process, like if you heard the term community organizing. In community organizing, the first step is being able to have a lot of conversations to see if there's common threads. And if there are common threads, then convening those people to say, hey, you may not have known that this concern that's on your heart is on all of your neighbors' hearts. Let's process this together and let's see what future we might be called to walk into together. As a result of this, what we realized was that there were no common threads. All of our folks were active. We had some folks that got tear gassed. We had some folks, we have a large number of Mexican folks that are a part of the campus ministry. And a number of them wanted to start conversations within the Mexican community of discrimination against Blacks by Mexicans. And so folks that were talking with their, you know, elders and family members. We had folks who were, you know, trying to raise money and food. We had people that were like, this is brand new to me. And I've just realized all that I have to learn, and wanted to start reading books and learning. And so what we discerned out of this is that we're not going to be a space for collective action. We're going to be a space for collective processing. And we're going to be trying to find ways for folks to be able to talk and process about what is it that you're learning, what is it that you're doing. Maybe there's the opportunity to be able to invite folks into some smaller group collaboration. But I think it's important to know, I think as a faith community, when are you being called to a thing? And when are you not being called to a thing? And I mean, I personally think everyone in Minneapolis is being called to do something, but maybe it's, you know, do something apart but process together. So that's what we're doing for this. I think an example of something that brought us to a point of collective action was really exploring that social isolation type stuff, and we've responded differently to that. But we're feeling a call to support each other in processing through what we're doing through conversation.
Cool. All right, thank you. And next we've got there you are, Diane Barnett.
Okay. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
First of all, I wrote down not a space for collective action, but a space for collective processing. That's huge. And I think we can all, Amy's nodding, we will all process that later.
I like that.
Something that came up in our little community today for me, we have a brand new superintendent of schools. He's been on the job 2 weeks, and he came in at, the worst time. We're trying to figure out what school's going to look like. We have in our little district, 13% of the kids have not been heard from since 13 March, which was our last day of school. Of that 13%, 98 are people of color, children of color.
Right.
So the problems that we're running into, we do not have any public transportation here. It doesn't, well, that's not true. There's one little bus, but in general, we don't have public transportation. So a food pantry is great, but if grandma doesn't have a car, so those 13% of kids who haven't been heard from have not received, and they all, 100% of them were free and reduced meals. So they got breakfast and lunch at school. So they haven't done homework. We haven't seen them. They haven't eaten as far as we know. So how do we mobilize? So there are places that provide food, but there aren't places that deliver food.
Yeah.
And we're in a pandemic right here. I don't know that we can ask everyone to go out to people's homes, but the superintendent would like a group of people to help him spearhead. How do we check in with these kids? And it's not a wellness call where the police then take away children because of neglect, and now we overwhelm a foster care system that's already overwhelmed. That's right. Not what he's looking to do.
Right.
So what's your advice about mobilizing the food that's collected to get it to the people who need it, who can't come to you?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think I'd start.
Put you on the spot. Sorry.
No, I think I'd start with who's at the table, and are the folks that are most impacted by the situation the ones who are around the table? And if not, how can we hold the table for them to come and to be able to co-create their own solutions? That whole thing of anything that's not with us is for us. I've butchered it. Anything not by us is not for us. But essentially, there's a lot of power that comes with being able to respond to things and to have the agency to respond. And I'm not a parent, but I couldn't imagine all of the feelings that I might feel if I knew that I had a child that I wasn't able to provide for their basic needs. It would be a lot of feelings, and they would not be positive feelings. And then to be told by someone else, who's coming in to tell me how I need to rate, that can be a really gross situation. So what are the ways to help understand who's at the table? So if what relationships already exist that can be leveraged within the communities that these folks come from. Who are the people who are seen as leaders? And it may not be elected officials. Maybe it's the barber who cuts everyone's hair, or maybe it's the person who sells pies. Maybe it's the people who sell pies in Minneapolis know every single person. Is shocking. So I'd see who's selling pie, and I'd just sort of be like, all right, pie sales folk, what do you know? But figuring out, and that's called in the community organizing world, asset mapping. And that's different from looking at what does a community lack, what are we missing. It's looking at what are the skills and gifts and strengths that are already there. And then are there ways that we can tap into it? If we've already got a relationship with a person and it's hey friend, we're thinking about this. that's a very different conversation than, hello, you've never heard of me before. I'm a church person, and I'm here to help. Like that can be received very differently. So start with where the friendships are, start with where the relationships are. Advocate for more space for folks at the table. Advocate for processes to come from the bottom up. Ask, like, what does success look like in 6 months? What does success look like a year from now? What's the world that we're being called to walk into? Like the specific mechanics of how to distribute. That's not an area that I am an expert in or knowledgeable of.
You very well answered the question. Yep, bring them to the table and find the leaders that know them, and that's what I'll do.
All right.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. I've got one if nobody else does. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, so Steve.
Yeah.
A question, and this is as much for me as for anybody else. But as you've talked, I've heard you name a lot of peoples, a lot of groups that could very well be considered your enemy. Okay, and the bad protesters that show up and ruin the peaceful protests, the folks that take the things that you've lovingly collected and go and resell it, the folks on the other side of this movement, people who would volunteer a lot and then after about 20 hours they disappear and they never are helped with again, and folks, I'm sure that you have folks that are, experts that call you and say, hey, you need to do this. Why aren't you doing this? We do this here. Why don't you do it there? How do you keep them from being your enemies in your heart?
Yeah. So I heard something that really made me think that when Jesus says, love your enemies, part of that is saying have enemies. And I think that folks who seek to deny the humanity and human rights of our neighbors, folks who seek to, steal and hurt and harm, like folks who seek to discriminate based on how a person looks or their class background, their gender, their sexual orientation, that they should both be our enemies and be loved. And I don't want that to be taken the wrong way, right? Like I don't think that what this person who wrote this very provocative article was saying was we should go around holier than thou, looking down on folks, but that we should know and acknowledge that there are forces and elements that are enemies of the way of Jesus and the way of love in the world, and that maybe the way to reach them is through love, and that those might be seeds that get planted and they don't bloom for a very long time, if at all.
Sure.
But to be able to say, or maybe like, even I feel uncomfortable saying that even, but maybe we can think of it as like larger social issues, that like racism is my enemy, hunger is my enemy, injustice is my enemy. Folks sleeping on the street while other folks sleep on $40,000 beds, like that's my enemy. And to have that, have enemies, but respond with love, because love is that transformation. I think about the long term, like the long-term vision a lot. And like, what does 5 years from now look like? What does 25 years from now look like? Like, what does 200 years from now look like? Like, what does it like to have dreams and visions and love for people that we will never meet because we will die long before they are born? And I think that can be like really abstract, but can also be really hopeful as well. That in some ways, like in a larger eschatological sense, we're fine because God loves us, and because of the life and ministry of Jesus Christ that we've all been invited into, and through the work of the Holy Spirit. So in that larger eschatological sense, like we're good. The problem right now is that the way that the kingdoms of the world have divided up things does not look at all like the way that the parables of Jesus make me think that the kingdom of the kingdom of God is and might be. So those are all things that give me hope as well. And then also there've been a lot of services of lament, right? And to be able to within the protest, like a lot of church folks showing up with like, we're going to pray litanies of lament. We're going to lament those times in our own lives that we've fallen short. We're going to lament those times where maybe we thought we were saying the right thing or doing the right thing, but we actually caused more pain to another person or to the world. We're going to mourn for all the ways that brokenness affects us. So we're all negatively impacted by systems of oppression. The people that are experiencing them are the ones that are perhaps most impacted, but everything that brings brokenness to systems and relationships, I think, is negative. Mm-hmm. So I think the counterbalance to all those things that I said was also like lament, deep spiritual grief, and knowing that we don't got the answers.
That's right. Oh, cool. All right. And ladies and gentlemen, Sunday sermon is finished now after hearing that. So thank you very much. They're all laughing. They're just muted, I'm sure. So, who else got a question? Anybody? Yeah, Denise. Did I find you? All righty. Yeah, sorry.
Here I am. A simple question. At the very beginning, you mentioned a residency that housed 7 kids.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of wondering who qualifies to be in the house and how long of a waiting list do you have?
Yeah. So right now, if you know anyone in Minneapolis, we've got 1 bed open, so send them my way.
Hey, I'm impressed.
Yeah.
I figured you had a waiting list.
Well, it's 1 year old. We started it in September, and we started with 3 folks. Lower unit of a duplex. Now we have the upper unit of the duplex as well. The big impetus for this was that one of our students said to me, I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know how I'm going to continue going to school. My parents are moving back to the country of origin. I don't know what's next for me. And having lived within an intentional community myself, I was like, well, let's start discerning. Maybe your story is calling us to create this community. Wow. And we started this is actually our second run at discerning. We started discerning this in 2015, and we discerned, nope, this is not the moment, not the people. But we ended up finding 3 wonderful, faithful folks who discerned into an intentional living situation, and one thing led to the next. Created a rule of life, rented a house, subsidized about 50% of it. Through our budget. As part of living there, they throw a weekly meal for their friends and neighbors, our friends and neighbors, that allow folks to be able to get to know each other on a deeper level. And about 2 to 3 weeks into living there, after all this long, patient discernment over really a number of years, the landlord was like, so do you want to renew for next year, and do you want the upper unit? You have 24 hours to decide. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need more time. And he's like, okay, great. You have 48 hours to decide. So the board was like, okay, well, we'll do this. We'll ride the train as far as we can. If we have to, drop one of the units after a year, go back down to 1 unit, we could do that. But, we've had folks kind of discern their ways in and out of the community. And,
how old are the kids?
Yeah. What's that?
How old are the kids?
These are college students. They tend to be first generation community college students.
Okay.
Yeah. So. Yeah, 20 to 23.
All boys, all girls mixed?
I think eventually, so the eventual intention is that it'll be a little bit everyone.
Like a college dorm.
All folks of all genders are all welcome. But in year one, it was 3 men. That's who the Lord brought to us. And I think that each season of life within the house is going to look a little different based on who's called to be there. So, yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? All right. Let's see here. I'm going to.
Oh, looks like there's.
Betsy Cole. Betsy is ready, and you'll have to click the button, Betsy, and then you're good to go.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
You're good to go.
Diane, this is for you. I have a friend who had a similar situation with children in Montgomery County, Virginia, when she moved there. And she single-handedly helped all of the school children who only ate at school. She had, by the end of the year, she had food going to them for all the holidays, everything. And I don't know how you do it during COVID, but have you been to all of the civic organizations, the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Women's Club, the League, the on and on, for help? Am I muted again?
No, I was muted. I'm sorry, Betsy.
Oh.
First, I would love to talk to your friend. And I got off the phone with the new superintendent about 3 hours ago. So no, I've not gone to all those people yet. But
all right. She did. I will definitely give you her name and number.
Perfect.
To get in contact with. My friends here know her. I'm talking about Sue Ferrari. Most of these women on board here know her. She's quite a dynamo. So
great. Thank you.
She'll help you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Collective thinking here. This is great. Anything else? Are we all right? All right. Ryan, you want to close this? You want me to close it?
Will, how about you go ahead and do your final piece that you were going to do, and then I'll close us with prayer at the very end.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Steve, thank you very much for being with us. You're a friend of ours. Okay, so thank you. And yes, if you could, if I knew how to unmute everybody at the same time, they would say, but just hear them. You can. We want to be a part of what you're doing there. I don't have a church Venmo account, but you will receive, via snail mail, a modest contribution to your efforts from me and Ryan, and that can also be joined, by anybody else that wants to kind of, pitch in. Just let me know, and we'll make we can make that happen. Okay, yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing. The way that you're keeping a beat, I do pray you're taking care of yourself. And Steve, if you need any help with that, please come see me. I will take care of you. Okay. We got fish, you know what I mean?
I look forward to that. I look forward to the day where we don't have to be on Zoom.
Right, and our enemy shall be the seafood store that we have to get the fish from because we didn't catch it. Okay.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
If it's okay with y'all, between when I was talking with Ryan about where to direct the funding or the contribution, and now the student of ours who I mentioned, who had been living at the memorial site in a tent, he has found housing, but he's also a father, and I would love to, if it's okay with y'all, be able to help him furnish the place to be able to take care of himself and his son. I mean, I think he's been offering such a faithful witness to the memorial, to the folks that are showing up. I think I mentioned that like he was there because he felt called to be there, and I think that's something that could have an extremely high impact. So definitely, with your permission, would love to extend your blessing to him, and then also look at maybe some other local places that could use that.
I trust you completely, man. I mean, hey, yeah. All right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Steve. It's been a real pleasure to hear your experiences and your reflections. It's great to see you. Please give my best to Joe. And I, too, look forward to the day when we're not doing this via Zoom, but in the flesh.
Yeah. College winter break, man, it's like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
South Carolina is not too far away to bring a van full of folks. So
Absolutely. Bring them on down. We'll put them to work one way or another.
Sounds like a plan.
Maybe wear a mask, but yeah.
Yeah.
Numbers sound good.
Right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Let's close in prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for Steve and for all the ministers that you have called to work in Minneapolis, to work in this country, to improve our lives and the lives of our neighbors, to build up your kingdom. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving Spirit may so move every human heart that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatreds cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
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 Cool. Thanks. All right. Well, see you all around. Steve, hope to see you in the boat sometime, okay?
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you. And thank you.
Good night, everyone.
See
Good to
y'all.
see you.
Take
Good
care.
to see you all.